It is delightful to be with you all this morning. I am such a privilege, really such a privilege, and it was nice to interact with some of you on Friday evening in the first session of this series, and I look forward to meeting many of you after the service as well. And I'll do my best to answer some of your questions about Job if you have any, though there's no promises, okay? Job is a difficult book, but let's do our best with it this morning. As Pastor Dan was saying, I have a family, and I think that we are, no, not these. Well, maybe they'll show up eventually. I thought I had them in the next slide, but that's okay. My wife Gabby, who is from Mexico, and I have been married for 23 and a half years. We just had our half-year anniversary. So 23 and a half years, that turns out to be 47 half years or something like that. 23 and a half years, and we have two children. Yair is our oldest son, our oldest child. He's 14, and Yael is our daughter. She is 9. My family lived in Israel for many years while I did my doctoral studies in Israel at Bar Ilan University in the Tel Aviv metropolitan area. And while we were there basically sent by a church. We had to raise support, as some of you I'm sure had to do. We had to raise support. And there was an organization that was very interested in permitting or facilitating Christians getting to church on Saturdays. That's when Christians meet in Israel. That's when everyone has off. And so that Christian ministry ended up buying my family and I a big Nissan van like that. It had windows in the back. That's not the exact model, but it fit like 12 people in it or something like that. And we were elated. I mean, imagine someone buying you a car. That's exactly what happened. The ministry bought us a car with the intent of us being able to take people to church. That's awesome, right? And also, one of the things that I would do is interestingly enough, there were many people that came from China to my university, and those people that came from China to my university didn't know anything about Christianity. And so they asked me, a Christian person at the university, to take them to the Christian sites and to teach them. How awesome is that ministry, right? Well, one time, I was in this van, I was driving, and, my wife, it was in the back. It was kind of far with the windows open, no air conditioner. And there was a woman in her mid-30s who was not from Israel. She was a foreign worker in Israel, conversing with my wife in the back of the van. And as the conversation went on, I picked up on pieces of the conversation. And finally, I heard, as I was listening to pieces of the conversation, I heard that our friend, she mentioned that her male employer was making sexually inappropriate gestures toward her while she was on the job. Now, I became intensely angry that this man had been violating my friend like this. And what seemed to be particularly abusive was that my friend was a foreign worker, and she didn't have the types of connections in order to properly report this type of behavior. And so with all of this sort of pent-up anger inside, I turned to my friend, and I raised my voice, and I commanded my friend, I said, the next time he does that, punch him in the face. Punch him in the face. I wholeheartedly I interjected into the conversation, right? In the middle of the conversation. I said, punch him in the face. That was my advice. I wholeheartedly sensed that my reaction was a good one, a righteous one. I was going to empower my friend to protect herself and stand up to her employer. And this is why I was totally perplexed why my friend looked at me like I had lost my mind. She looked at me and she calmly stated a fact that I had missed in the conversation and would have supplied the context that I needed while I interjected. She calmly stated, he's 97 years old. And he has dementia. I really wish I would not have interjected into the conversation. I really wish that I would have heard the rest of the conversation. I wish I would have had some knowledge in order to give good advice. But how frequently do we as people rush to conclusions without and interject ourselves into conversations and into lives of people without knowing the circumstances surrounding a particular situation? Missing the context of the conversation permitted me from grasping the information that I needed in order to properly interpret and interject You know, I wish I would have heard all that my friend said. And it turns out, without me knowing the context of the conversation and me jumping into the conversation, I wasn't only recommending but commanding my friend to physically injure a 97-year-old man with dementia, right? For whom she had been caring for whom she had been, working with. She was a caretaker. I guess the moral of the story is, first, I'm a dummy. Secondly, it's good to have in proper information, or as much as we possibly can, before jumping into a conversation with some of the information. The more information we get, especially as it pertains to dialogue, quotations, allusions, the better we're able to get the whole picture of what's actually going on and interpret and then interject properly. Job's friends speak out of line. They really do seem to believe that their explanations for Job's suffering are good and right. But their explanations and their advice is basically the equivalent of me telling my friend to punch her employee in the face. It sounded good, but it wasn't right. Job's friends are tragically wrong, and we know this. Why do we know this? We know that they judged Job's friends based upon his circumstances and not based upon the truth that we get in the prologue. Let's start reading today from Job chapter 4, verses 1 to 11. This is Eliphaz. This is Job's first friend in the first round of speeches, pushing Job, encouraging Job to turn back to God as a result of a potential sin that he might be hiding, something that he may have done wrong. Job's friends in the first round, especially Eliphaz and Bildad, encouraged Job to turn back to God. And this is what Eliphaz says in chapter 1, verse 2. If one ventures a word with you, will you be impatient? Yet who can keep from speaking? That is, I have to speak, he says. Behold, Job, you have instructed many, and you have strengthened weak hands. You have upheld him who was stumbling, and you have made firm the feeble knees. But now it has come to you, and you are impatient. It touches you, and you are dismayed. That is, Job, you used to help other people, and now it comes to you, and you're dismayed. What's up with that? Then he says, is not your fear of God your confidence, and the integrity of your ways your hope? And then this, remember, speaking to Job, who that was innocent ever perished? Or where were the upright cut off? That is, Job, have the innocent ever perished? Have the innocent ever gone through what you're going through? And then he says in verse 8, as I have seen, those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same. That is, you've plowed iniquity, Job. Now you're sowing. By the breath of God they perish, and by the blast of his anger they are consumed. You see that? God's in charge of retribution, according to Eliphaz, and God is going to bring about retribution. Job, turn back. And then he gives an example. He says in verse 10, the roar of the lion, the voice of the fierce lion, and the teeth of the young lions are broken. The strong lion perishes for lack of prey, and the cubs of the lioness are scattered. That is, you see the strong lion, Job? He's eventually deprived of prey. He doesn't get what he needs. And his children, guess what? His children are also scattered. He has no more children. Job, you're kind of like the lion here. You maybe were once strong, but now you're suffering. This is what happens to people that don't honor God. Now, us as readers of the prologue, that's the first 2 chapters of the book of Job, we know that Job is a wealthy man. If someone had bling back in the day, it was Job, right? And Job's wealth is presented in terms of the amount of livestock he has and how they were able to multiply. He was a rich man. Livestock was one of the ways in which wealth was judged in the biblical world, because they didn't have coin currency. If you had a lot of animals, you were rich. But Job's prosperity is stripped from him. And according to his friends, losing wealth was a telltale sign of retribution in force, divine retribution. God is doing it. Traditional wisdom in ancient Israelite tradition kind of suggests this, right? This is why some people read Job's friends and they're like, well, they're kind of right, aren't they? But listen, traditional wisdom and ancient Israelite tradition suggests that a lot of livestock was a blessing from God. If you look at Deuteronomy 28, we read that the Lord blesses those who follow his commands with livestock. Here's what chapter 28, verses 1 and 4 say in Deuteronomy. It says, if you faithfully obey the voice of the Lord your God, God speaking to the people of Israel through Moses, being careful to do all the commandments that I command you today, blessed be the fruit of your cattle and the increase of your herds and the young of your flock, right? So the curse upon Job's livestock was for those who didn't obey the Lord. So his friends are looking at Job, who was once rich. They have this traditional Israelite wisdom in their minds, and they say, hey, Job, turn back to God, right? That's just one example. Now, I think we could also say that Job's friends point to and suggest that Job's lack of offspring is also as a result of his wickedness. Now, if we look other places in the Bible, like the Psalms and the Proverbs, we also see that offspring is a divine blessing, right? Having children is a divine blessing. But a lack of offspring is a curse. That is, you can't carry your family's name on into the future. If we read some of the Psalms and Proverbs, it sounds like that's exactly how the world works. And Job's friends say, you have any kids anymore? That's probably or definitively a sign of retribution, right? Once upon a time, Job had 7 sons. He had 3 daughters, and they all fell prey to this windstorm that struck his house where they were located. And then Job, you look at Job, and he's dying. And this terrible demise, this dishonorable demise, is also something that Job's friends say is just divinely oriented, just retribution. And you know what? If you look at some of the Proverbs, we see that it seems like the wicked just die, right? If we look at the Proverbs, we see that the wicked suffer a demise. So in traditional Israelite wisdom says kind of the same thing. So Job's friends are looking at Job. He has no wealth. He has no offspring. He's suffering a terrible demise. And they're like, Job, you must be a pretty wicked guy. Turn back to God. And Job challenges that. He says, no way. That's not how things work. Job challenges the idea that the wicked agonize. He's defiant to his friends. He challenges the idea that the wicked agonize and live a life, suffering, right? According to Job, the wicked live joyous lives. They live prosperous lives. They have a lot of children. Well, one thing that we know is that Job, in his defiance, will not accept his friend's explanation for what's going on in his life. Now, here's the funny thing, kind of funny. We know that Job, on the one hand, is right because we have information from the prologue. We're going to talk about human finitude and things that we don't know next service and how that plays into what God is doing in the world. We're going to talk about that next service. But we know that Job's friends don't have a lot of the information, but they interject into the conversation like me. And they say, Job, you're being punched in the face because of X, Y, and Z. Turn back to God. We learn that the book of Job teaches us that it's not possible to really judge a person solely based upon their circumstances, which is precisely what Job's friends do. It's a mistake to look at someone's circumstances and conclude that those circumstances are a definite reflection of their character. We know this because of our reading in Job. What does Job do? He curses his birth in chapter 3. Job curses his birth in chapter 3, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a second. And he starts to talk about how he's suffering. Now, Job's friends jump in immediately. So after chapter 3, when Job curses his birth, comes chapter 4, which is what we just read, Eliphaz, saying, Job, you got to turn back to God. Like now this, you used to counsel others, and now this has come upon you, and you're suffering. Right? Job's friends, interestingly enough, recognize his suffering, but they acknowledge, they prioritize the theological implications of their system of just retribution. The traditional wisdom of just retribution, as you can see on the screen, asserts that people always experience the consequences of their actions. Always experience, and that's what Job's friends are saying to him. They understand that if someone is being punished as if they were wicked, then that person must be guilty of some offense against God. And since Job is suffering, as we see, his suffering and the type of suffering that he's going through is reserved for the wicked in ancient Israelite tradition and thought, then there must be some kind of sin in his life. And so, therefore, Job should view his suffering as divine discipline. He should accept it, and he should return to God. And Job's friends say, by returning to God, you'll reap the benefits and experience prosperity once again. And Job's defiant. He says no, and he recognizes that Job's friends are using God like a gumball machine. If you just do a certain type of thing, you put the coin in, you turn the knob, then something good's going to come out. I love gumball machines. And I love the gum for the first 30 seconds that I chew it. Then it gets really hard. But that's how they're treating God, right? Let me give you 3 examples or reiterate the 3 examples that represent the consequences of wickedness according to Job's friends. These are not the only consequences. These are quick ones that we can show, and you can see. And I have some Bible verses up on. I'll put some Bible verses up on the screen if you're interested in sort of doing a little bit of a study on your own. But remember, Job's friends suggest that Job's loss of wealth, Job's lack of offspring, and Job's undignified death demonstrate that he is indeed a wicked person, and that's what they say in their conversation with Job. Readers of the prologue, that's us, we recognize that Job's a wealthy man. His wealth's presented, as I said, in terms of his livestock, right? But Job's prosperity is taken away from him. Check this out. Job's friends say, the wicked person, this is Eliphaz, they say, he, that is the wicked person, will not be rich, and his wealth will not endure, nor will his possessions spread over the earth. Now, this sounds a little bit funny, but remember, Job's friends are speaking in poetry. So what we have is, he is not going to be rich, and he's not going to have money. That's a reiteration of the same thing, right? After the comma. Nor will his possessions spread over the earth. That is, he won't have possessions. Eliphaz says this, and so does, as you can see here, Zophar in chapter 20. Job's friends reiterate, hey, you don't have money. This is what happens to wicked people. They lose their money. Job also doesn't have children. Now, this is the hardest to take, I think, right? Job's friends are insistent that Job's lack of children is as a result of his wickedness. According to their traditional doctrine, justice was applied to the wicked in such a way that they would have no descendants, whether it be by infertility or whether it be by the death of their children. And we read in the Torah, in Deuteronomy 28, something like the fruit of the womb is a blessing from the Lord for the people of Israel. We read that. Those who honor God would have the privilege of passing on his name and memory through their children. So it sounds like Job's friends are like kind of right, but they're wrong. We'll talk about why they're wrong in just a couple of minutes and how we know that they're wrong. Job had all of these children and they died. Job's friends go, aha. That's one of the reasons how we're able to recognize that you are indeed a wicked person. And so not only did Job's friends view the death of his children as divine justice, but they also looked at him and suggested that his dying was also indicative of retribution, right? Job's friends are convinced that retribution is manifest by the way of wicked dying, a tormented and undignified death. And Job is sitting there, right, with all of these boils on him, or inflammation, the Hebrew says. He's just inflamed. And he's sitting there listening to his friends judge his character based 100% based upon his circumstances. Now, we know that they are making a mistake because we have the information of the prologue. But let's just talk a little bit more about Job's undignified death, okay? Let's settle here for a second and follow how Job and Job's friends are telling him that he's dying the way that he's dying because he's not honoring God. And then we'll talk about how we know that they are wrong in their assessment, all right? So, this is, having no posterity or progeny. This is Eliphaz and Job's terrible death. There we go. All right, he will suck the poison of cobras and the tongue of a vapor will kill him. That's a pretty terrible death right there. Now, here's what Job's friends, here's how we can tell that Job's friends are telling Job that he's going to die a terrible death, but we know that they are wrong in their assessment. Now, for those of you that were here on Friday, we talked about Job cursing. As you can see, I put damning the day of his death. That's my translation of Job 3:3. When he does this, he starts to use light and darkness imagery. Look at, may the day be darkness. May God not seek it from above. May the light not shine upon it. You see all of that light and darkness imagery? He's saying, may darkness and deep doom desecrate it. May a cloud dwell on it. May deep darkness of the day terrify it. He's talking about the day of his birth. He wants it eliminated, totally eliminated. That night, may darkness take it. May it not rejoice in the days of the year and the numbers of months. May it not come. All of those are what Job is saying about the day of his birth. Notice that he's using darkness as a metaphor for non-existence. He's saying darkness means that something doesn't exist. He doesn't want his birthday to exist. But then he moves on and he starts to talk. There we go. Then he moves on and he says, hey, I actually want to die. Now, Job never considers suicide, but he just wishes he was dead. Check this out. Or why was I not born why was I not as a buried stillborn? Right? Why didn't I just die when I came out of the womb? Why was I not as babies who never saw light, says Job. Now we understand that light means life and death means darkness. As you can see also through this verse, right? Why does God give, that is God, give light to the sufferer and life to the bitter soul? Those who wait for death, but it is non-existent, and those who dig for it more than hidden treasures. So here we have death is darkness and life is light. And these are the first words of Job in his monologue, right? That he has with his friends. What's interesting here is that Job's friends pick up on this light-darkness imagery. And they start to converse using the metaphor. Now, this is really interesting. You catch this. One of the reasons why Job is a difficult book sometimes is because it's written in poetry. And I've frequently heard that poetry is that which you cannot translate, right? That's what makes something poetic. Think about, for those of you that are multilingual here, and you know a poem in your mother tongue, and you try to translate that poem into another tongue, and you think, you know what, actually, it doesn't rhyme anymore, or the alliteration doesn't work, or, right? You lose some of the meaning, I guess you could say, when you translate it. Now, check this out. Job and his friends, in the entirety of their conversations, are speaking in poetry. But we have it translated into our mother tongue, whether it be English or Mandarin or Cantonese or whatever it might be. And so sometimes we don't pick up on the metaphors, because metaphors are used a lot in poetry. Job starts to use this metaphor of light and darkness in chapter 3. His friends are like, nah, Job, you're using that the wrong way. And Eliphaz says here, darkness is actually preserved for the wicked people. Right? So if you want to use this metaphor of light and darkness, darkness meaning death, it means, Job, that you're using this the wrong way. Darkness is reserved for the wicked. He goes on to say these types of things utilizing darkness. He will not depart from darkness. That is the wicked person. He will not depart from darkness. God is responsible for the just retribution carried out upon the wicked person. Job says, hey, actually, we'll move on here. Oh, Job in chapter 17, he picks up on the fact that his friends are like, hey, darkness is not being used the right way. So this is what darkness really means. Well, Job's like, no, actually, darkness means death, but not necessarily for wicked people. As you can see here in this, he says, I just want to go to Sheol in the darkness. Darkness for him means rest. It doesn't mean just retribution upon wicked people. So Job pushes back against Eliphaz. And he says, no, you're using that metaphor the wrong way. That's what we would say. But speaking in poetry, he uses the metaphor differently, pushing back against his friend's just retribution theory. Now, here's what happens. Naturally, his friends are like, no, Job, you're using that metaphor the wrong way. So the next person to speak is Bildad. And Bildad says, the light of the wicked will wane, and the flame of his fire will not gleam. Light will darken in his tent, and his lamp will wane on him. What does it mean when light gets darkened? It means there's darkness, and darkness, according to Job's friends, is death. So they're telling Job he's going to die because he's a wicked person. In poetry, what is the point of Bildad's reference to the lamp in Job 18? And how should we understand it within the context of the references of the lamp? Now, we're reading the book of Job, and we come across this lamp imagery, and many of us will be like, oh, that's cute. Why is he talking about a lamp now? And it's because he's continuing this light-darkness conversation. But here's the thing. Bildad is telling Job, as you can see here, that the wicked person is going to be in darkness. And he's telling him to his face in the context of telling him that you have no children, that's just retribution. In the context of telling him that he's lost all of his possessions, that's just retribution, right? This dialogue is getting worse and worse as we continue. Job, you're going to be banished from light. Well, we're kind of like, where does Bildad get this idea of lamp imagery and that people are going to be banished from light and darkness? And why is he talking this way to Job? Like, would Job have even understood what Bildad was saying? And the answer to that is yes. So let's look at a couple other places in the Bible. The light of the righteous rejoices, but the lamp of the wicked will be put out. That's Proverbs 13. So some of us look at Proverbs and compare it to what Bildad's saying. We're like, Bildad's kind of right. Like, he sounds like the Proverbs. And you might be thinking, but that's just one example. Maybe, Dr. Dom, give me another. What? Fine. Here's another example. If one curses his father or his mother, his lamp will be put out in utter darkness. That's Proverbs 20:20. You see that? For the evil man has no future, the lamp of the wicked will be put out. That's Proverbs 24:20. So it really sounds like Job's friends are in agreement with what the Bible says about traditional wisdom, right? And as a result of they're looking at Job and they're seeing that he has no posterity. They're seeing that that is children. They're seeing that he has no more. They're seeing that he has no more children. That's what I just said. They're seeing that he's no more money, wealth. Thank you very much for the help. And they're seeing that he's dying slowly a terrible death. And for us as readers of the Bible, we're kind of like, holy smokes, it sounds like they might be right about what they're saying to Job, but they aren't. And how do we know that they aren't? Job pushes back. He hears the lamp imagery in chapter 21, and he's defiant. He says, how often does the lamp of the wicked wane? That is, Bildad, what you're saying is not consistent. That's not right. And their calamity comes from them. How often does God distribute pains in his anger? How does this really happen, Job says? And in Job chapter 21, he pushes back on almost all of the things that his friends say in his language. So if you there's a lot of text on this chart, but Job's friends say, you have no descendants. Those are the references. They say, you have no financial prosperity. Those are the references. They say, the wicked die horrible deaths. Those are the references. And in Job chapter 21, he uses this image. He's defiant. He says, no, no, no. That's not the way the world works. How do we know that Job's pushing back and his defiance is like actually a real thing? Or that is, how do we know that Job is in the right by pushing back? Now, not everything that Job says in the book is necessarily prophetic. We talked about this on Friday. Job makes some mistakes in the sense that he doesn't know what's going on in the prologue either, so he talks without knowing, something we're going to talk about next service. But here is the thing. Job's friends interject themselves into this conversation, 4 of them total. And they do not know that they are misapplying traditional wisdom. Here's how we know that they're misapplying traditional wisdom. Because we have the prologue. So Job's friends look at Job, and they're simply looking at his earthly circumstances. And they are judging him based upon tradition. And so what they're saying is, if you go back to God based upon our tradition, you're going to reap the positive benefits of that. Just do X, Y, and Z, and you're going to start reaping benefits from God. It's a formula for them. And Job says, no, no, no. And we as readers say, no, no, no. This is not a formula. It's never a formula, neither in Job's lives nor in our lives. It's interesting that sometimes we live our lives thinking that if we just do X, Y, and Z, we deserve the benefits from God. We deserve the benefits that God's supposed to give to his people. And we think to ourselves, God, I deserve this. I deserve the benefits that you're supposed to give to me. That's the way Job's friends thought. But they thought wrongly, and then they utilized imagery that was prevalent in ancient Israel to condemn Job. This is precisely why God says that they did not speak rightly about him at the end. Now, thinking about this, we can't just say Job's friends were dummies. They weren't. They spoke 30-something chapters in poetry. That's pretty awesome. We can't say that they were just dummies, right? They weren't dummies. They were normal people like us. And they rushed to conclusions like I did in my van. They claimed, that they knew exactly what was going on when they didn't. But in fact, their words indeed demonstrated that they were not aware of all of the circumstances and that they couldn't judge Job's situation. Job's defiance helps us understand that in situations in which we know that we're not being punished for something, we have to stand our ground as Christian people, trusting in God. When bad things happen to us and it's not as a result of our sin, when bad things happen, we can't look to God and say, hey, I deserve the benefits of being your child. And the reason is because we know that Job, who was righteous, he was a righteous and upright man, did not, at least for this period, have experienced the benefits of being a child of God. But also, frequently, we make ourselves Job's friends. Now, none of us would want to say, I'm Job's friends and I judge people. No one would say that. But in reality, we do judge people based upon their circumstances, difficult circumstances, judging someone's character because they're in a tough spot. In the context of a church, frequently this happens, and I've seen this and I've experienced this with rebellious children. There's nobody here that was a rebellious child, right? Only me? But with rebellious children, now we look around at people's life situations, and some of us say, including myself, oh, geez, if they'd have been a better parent. Geez, it's because they didn't homeschool. Oh, geez, it's because they got divorced. The kids are like this. They're suffering the consequences. We don't know if they just stayed more home with their kids, if they would have gone to his or her baseball games or softball games. We don't know the circumstances. We don't know the circumstances as to why people go astray. We don't know that, right? But also I think, examples of how we judge people without knowing their circumstances is sometimes we look at sick people and we say if they would have just gotten better, if they would have done a particular diet. That's also a pretty prevalent one. And you can think to yourselves of some financial struggles. Oh, if they would have just done this class with this person, this financial guru, they wouldn't be struggling to make payments, right? Those types of things. If they had only managed their money better. We interject ourselves into conversations, sometimes even physically, or that is like Job's friends, or sometimes even just in our hearts. We judge people. We interject ourselves into their lives. Now, you got to get this. My reflection is not intended to suggest that there are no consequences for our actions. There are consequences. Reaping and sowing is a real thing. But Eliphaz used that improperly because Job wasn't reaping anything. So he was utilizing traditional Israelite language to judge Job when that traditional Israelite language didn't apply in Job's situation. The purpose of my reflection is to remind us of a theological truth that Job shows us. Job shows us that it's not possible to observe people's difficult circumstances and draw definitive conclusions about their character. The circumstances in a person's life aren't necessarily a reflection of their character. Okay, so Dr. Dom, what should I do then? I know that my friends are suffering, and I know that they probably need me because I can't leave them alone, so what should I do? Well, here are a couple of practical steps as we conclude that you should think about maybe doing when your friends are going through difficult situations and you are in the conversation. Be sensitive. As you can see, there's a citation at the bottom of this page, a very good book. Some of these are from a very good book that one of my friends wrote. But be sensitive. Be patient. It's not always a time for a theological lecture. So when going to the hospital or sitting with someone who's in pain, it's probably not the best idea to say, God works all things together for good, right? Meanwhile, we have someone who's experiencing real suffering. That might not be the time for a theological lecture. It isn't. Another point, be humble. Let's not presume to know more than we actually know. We should be humble in situations in which we see people suffering, and we shouldn't presume to know the reasons for their suffering. Also, be practical. Those who suffer often need practical help when tragedy strikes. Okay, one of the things that churches do that I love is they feed people that are going through situations, right? They create sometimes a dinner, I forget exactly what it's called, but sometimes they create like a schedule, and you can go feed people when they're struggling. And I know that when I was going through a recent operation that I had, and my family was caring for me, when my pastor brought me in and out, it was heaven. It was awesome. It was awesome to sit there and eat and not have to worry about hobbling around like I was at that time to prepare something for myself or to burden my wife. Sometimes people just need practical help. What good is the theological help and telling them that God works all things together for good if you're not carrying out that good? And then lastly, let's be prayerful people. Let's long to connect people who suffer with God. Let's point them to God if we can. But the first step to that is not just reciting biblical verses, it's praying. It's praying that somehow, some way, people's difficult circumstances would connect them with God through the person and the work of Jesus. God is the one who's ultimately compassionate. God is the one who is ultimately empathetic, right? Listen, we don't know everything. Our own finitude as human beings, that is our own inability to be infinite as human beings, prevents us from drawing conclusions about difficult situations. And so sometimes we shouldn't tell our suffering friends to punch people in the face. Sometimes we need to take a deep breath and follow some of these steps and provide practical help to those who are suffering. Now, I think that not having enough information, in fact, let me restart that sentence. Job shows us, the book of Job shows us, that not having enough information frequently causes us to interject into conversations like Job's friends. And that is what I'm calling human finitude, the fact that we don't have enough information. That's the third important point that the book of Job teaches us, and that's what we're going to talk about in our next time together in the next service. Let me close by praying. Lord, we are so grateful that we have the scriptures, even difficult sections, to learn from, Lord, to learn from the experiences that others went through, Lord, and to see more of your character. It's difficult in Job. It really is. This is difficult, Lord. But it's your word, and it applies to us, and we honor it. And however we can be obedient to it, Lord, that's what we desire. I do pray specifically for those that might be suffering now, that those that might be looking to God now, to you, Lord, now, and saying, Lord, why? What's going on? And those that are around them, those that are friends, Lord, give wisdom, provide wisdom, allow us to be prayerful, loving people that serve your body, that serve your world, and honor you while we do it. And may you take the glory. We pray in the name of Jesus. Amen.